The envelope was waiting on my doorstep the morning after his funeral. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in 11 years, handwriting that belonged to a boy who had been dead for 3 days. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice before I got the door open. I sat down right there on the cold concrete step, snow melting through my jeans, and stared at that envelope like it might disappear if I blinked. Because it shouldn't have existed. Because the person who wrote it was gone. Because some part of me, the part that never stopped loving him, whispered he knew this would happen. I want to tell you how I got here. To this step, this snow, this letter that shouldn't be possible. But to understand it, you have to go back to the winter I was 22 and the boy who taught me that love could survive almost anything except silence. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of Theo, and the 7 letters he left me before he learned that some promises outlive the people who make them. I met Theo Whitfield in a bookstore that smelled like cedar and old paper, the kind of place that only exists in small towns that haven't caught up to the rest of the world yet. I was hiding from a family dinner I didn't want to attend. He was hiding from a life he hadn't chosen for himself, though I wouldn't learn that for months. He was reaching for the same book I wanted, a worn copy of Letters Between Two Long-Dead Poets, and our fingers brushed against the spine at the same moment. He laughed first. I remember that clearly because his laugh sounded like something breaking open, surprised by its own existence. "You can have it," he said. "I've read it twice already, I just like holding it." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. There was something underneath it, some quiet ache I couldn't name yet. We ended up sharing a bench outside instead, passing the book between us, reading our favorite lines aloud while the late autumn wind pulled leaves across the sidewalk like small brown ghosts. By the time the streetlights flickered on, I knew his middle name, his fear of deep water, and the fact that he hadn't told his father he'd stopped going to law school. He knew almost nothing about me except that I listened like it mattered. That was the beginning, though neither of us called it anything yet. We became something unspoken over the following weeks, 2 boys who found every excuse to end up in the same coffee shop, the same library corner, the same patch of sidewalk after dark. Theo had a habit of going quiet right when conversations turned serious, like vulnerability physically frightened him. I noticed the way he'd start a sentence about his family and then stop, swallow it, change the subject to something safer. I didn't push. I'd learned early that some people open like doors and others open like wounds, slowly and only when they trust the hands near them. One night in early December, walking home through a light snow that hadn't committed to sticking yet, he stopped under a street lamp and turned to face me. His breath caught before he spoke, and for a second I thought he might cry. "I don't know how to say things out loud," he said. "I never have, but I write them. I've been writing you things I can't say." He didn't explain further. He just looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet, something between hope and terror, and then he laughed nervously and changed the subject again. I didn't understand what he meant, not yet. That understanding would come later, wrapped in paper, slid under doors, left where only I would find it. The first letter arrived 3 days before Christmas, tucked into my coat pocket while we sat together at a small cafe that overlooked the frozen harbor. I didn't notice it until I got home, until I shrugged off my coat and heard paper crinkle against my palm. "Daniel," it began, "I don't know how to tell you that you've become the only part of my day that feels honest. So I'm writing it instead. Maybe that's cowardice. Maybe it's just the only language fear lets me speak." I read it 4 times that night. Then I read it a 5th, slower, like savoring something that might not last. There was a tenderness in his handwriting itself, a pressure that wavered in certain words like his hand had trembled writing them. The next day I found him at our usual table, and for the first time since we'd met I watched him brace for rejection. His shoulders were tight, his eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder, refusing to meet mine directly. "I got your letter," I said softly. He looked away. Silence fell between us, thick enough to taste. Then I reached across the table just enough to touch his fingers and told him the only true thing I had, that I'd been writing him letters too, except mine stayed unsent, folded in a drawer because I was just as afraid as he was. That winter became a season built around paper. Theo would slip letters into my bag under my door between the pages of books he knew I'd eventually open. Each one revealed something he couldn't say aloud. His strained relationship with his father, his terror of disappointing people, the quiet exhaustion of pretending to be someone easier to love. I started writing back, though I rarely managed to say things directly either. We became two people circling honesty through paper, building intimacy in ink because our voices kept failing us. It should have felt strange. Instead, it felt like the safest kind of love I'd ever known. There was a particular evening, snow falling steady outside frosted windows, when he finally told me why he flinched at certain words like future and forever. His older brother had come out years earlier, and the fallout had fractured their family quietly, permanently, in ways no one discussed at dinner but everyone still felt. I watched what honesty cost him, Theo said, voice barely above a whisper. I promised myself I'd never let anyone get close enough to ask me the same questions. I didn't say anything wise or comforting. I just sat beside him close enough that our shoulders touched and let the silence hold us both. Sometimes love isn't found in answers. Sometimes it's found in someone willing to sit inside your fear without trying to fix it. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, the way it always does in towns built along cold water. Theo and I had become something neither of us had officially named, though everyone around us seemed to understand it before we did. We held hands on quiet streets. We stopped pretending the space between us was anything but love. Then, on an afternoon thick with the smell of rain on warm pavement, his father called. I watched Theo's face change as he listened, watched the color drain slowly from it like watching ice melt off a window. He hung up without saying goodbye, then stood frozen, staring at nothing. He knows, Theo said finally, someone told him. About us. His hands shook as he said it. I reached for them instinctively, but he pulled away just slightly, just enough to remind me how fragile all of this still was. I didn't take it personally. I understood even then that fear doesn't ask permission before it takes hold of someone. That night he left me a letter I almost didn't want to read because I could already feel its weight before I opened it. I'm not ashamed of you, it said. I'm ashamed of how easily I could lose everything for loving you. Please don't mistake my silence for doubt. It's just fear wearing a familiar coat. The summer that followed was the happiest season of my life, though happiness, I would learn, rarely announces when it's running out of time. Theo's father never fully accepted us, but he stopped fighting it loudly, settling instead into a cold, distant tolerance that Theo treated as a quiet victory. We built a small life together in the kind of details people romanticize in hindsight. Sunday mornings with coffee gone cold from too much talking, long drives with no destination, his hand finding mine in movie theaters during scenes neither of us were watching. I thought we'd built something permanent. Then, in early autumn, Theo received a diagnosis that changed the shape of everything. A rare heart condition, the kind that hides quietly for years before announcing itself without warning. The doctors used careful language, words like manageable and monitor closely, but I saw the fear in Theo's eyes that those words were trying to soften. He smiled softly at me that night, the kind of smile people use to comfort someone else while breaking apart themselves. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I believed him because I needed to. I didn't yet understand that some promises are made by people who already suspect they can't keep them. The letters didn't stop after his diagnosis. If anything, they multiplied as though Theo sensed time slipping faster than either of us wanted to admit. Each winter became its own small ritual, a letter waiting for me somewhere unexpected, tucked into a glove, hidden inside a Christmas ornament, slid beneath my pillow while I slept beside him. He never explained why winter specifically mattered so much to him until our third year together, sitting by a fire that crackled softly while snow piled silently outside. Winter is when I almost lost everyone who mattered, he said. My brother left in winter, my mother got sick in winter. I started believing winter takes things from me. So I started leaving you letters instead, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. If winter was going to take something, I wanted it to take proof that I loved you first, proof it could never erase. I held him that night longer than usual, neither of us speaking, the fire slowly dimming into embers. I didn't know yet how prophetic his fear would become. I only knew that I wanted to spend every winter we had left proving him wrong about what the season could take from us. 2 years later, Theo's heart finally betrayed the promise his words had made me. It happened quietly, almost gently, the way some quiet things shatter without warning. I found him in our kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday morning, sunlight slipping innocently through the window like it hadn't just witnessed the end of everything. The next several days blurred into hospital corridors, hushed voices, and a grief too large for any room to hold. His father stood beside me at the funeral, the first time he'd ever acknowledged me as something more than tolerated. He talked about you constantly, he admitted quietly, more than he ever let me see. I went home that night to an empty apartment that still smelled faintly like him. I sat in darkness for hours, unable to process a world that no longer included his laughter breaking open in bookstores or his handwriting trembling honestly across paper. That's when I found the envelope on my doorstep the next morning, the one with no stamp, no explanation, just my name in handwriting that belonged to someone who was already gone. My breath caught. My hands shook. Somehow, impossibly, Winter had left me one more letter. I sat on that frozen step for almost an hour before I found the courage to open it. The handwriting confirmed what I already suspected. Theo had written it months earlier, anticipating an ending he never spoke aloud, arranging for a friend to deliver it after he was gone. Daniel, it began, if you're reading this, winter has finally taken what I always feared it would. But I refuse to let it take everything. I asked Marcus to keep this letter and give it to you exactly one winter from now, on whatever day felt right to him. I wanted you to have one more piece of me when the season felt heaviest. He wrote about gratitude, not grief. About the bookstore, the bench, the letters, the years he hadn't expected to receive but treasured completely once they arrived. He wrote that loving me had taught him bravery he never thought himself capable of, and that even fear couldn't undo what we'd built. Please don't let winter become something you fear too, he wrote near the end. Let it become the season you remember love arriving in unexpected envelopes. I'll always find a way to leave you something, even from wherever I end up next. It's been 3 winters since that morning on my doorstep, 3 winters since I buried the boy who taught me love could exist in paper and trembling handwriting and quiet, persistent courage. I kept his letters in a small wooden box that sits on my windowsill where morning light touches it first. Every December now I write him back, even though I know no answer will ever come. It isn't about expecting a response. It's about continuing a conversation that mattered too much to let end completely. Grief, I've learned, doesn't disappear, it simply learns to live quietly beside love. Last winter, I finally returned to that same bookstore where everything began. The same poetry book sat on the same shelf, slightly more worn, waiting like it always had been. I bought it again, the same way Theo once had, and sat on the same bench outside, reading our favorite lines aloud to no one but the cold air. A stranger walking past slowed slightly, smiling at the sight of someone reading poetry alone in the snow. I smiled back, surprised by how light it felt. Somewhere I believe Theo would have liked that moment. Some loves don't end when people do, they simply change the shape of how they stay. This winter, I started writing letters of my own, not to Theo, but for him, stories about us that I leave anonymously for strangers who look like they need a reminder that love is worth the risk it demands. I don't know if it heals anything completely, but it feels like honoring a season that once felt like loss, transforming it instead into something closer to grace. The boy who left me a letter every winter was never just about Theo's fear or his illness, or even his death. It was about 2 people who learned that vulnerability, however terrifying, becomes bearable when shared honestly between trembling hands. It was about a love story that refused to end quietly, even after everything tried to make it. If you ever find yourself afraid to say something out loud, write it down instead. Leave it somewhere someone you love will find it. Let paper hold what your voice can't yet carry. That fear doesn't disappear, but it becomes survivable when love insists on speaking anyway. Wherever Theo is now, I hope he knows his letters didn't just survive winter. They became the reason I learned to love it again.